A face stared back at her from behind the screen, older but unmistakable, the same eyes she had cried over for 14 years. And there he was, casually smiling in a cafe thousands of miles away, tagged in a stranger's Instagram post. How could her son, officially declared dead in Afghanistan in 2009, be alive and drinking coffee in Buenos Aires? The discovery happened in a modest home in Riverside, California. Sarah Brennan, 61, mother of Marine Corporal Matthew Brennan, was mindlessly scrolling through Instagram when the algorithm suggested a travel blogger's page she might like. It was pure chance, or fate, that made her pause on a photo of a picturesque cafe where the blogger had captured a candid street scene. In the background, at a small table under a striped awning, sat a man Sarah instantly recognized, despite the years that had passed. Matthew had been only 22 when his unit was caught in an IED explosion near Kandahar. Military officials reported that the blast had been catastrophic, with remains so severely damaged that DNA testing was limited. The Brennan family received a folded flag, posthumous medals, and a death certificate. They buried an empty coffin. Growing up in Riverside, Matthew had been the kind of child who disassembled radios just to see how they worked. By 13, he was fixing neighbors' computers for extra money. He had his mother's quick smile and his father's steady determination. After high school, college didn't appeal to him. He wanted purpose, structure, something bigger than himself. The Marines gave him that. "I need to do something that matters, Mom," he had told Sarah the day he enlisted. Their last phone call had been brief. "Don't worry too much," he'd said. "I'll be home before you know it." Those words had haunted Sarah for years. The investigation began with Sarah's trembling hands taking screenshots and calling her daughter Jessica. "I'm not crazy, Jess. Look at his face. Look at that scar above his eyebrow from when he fell off his bike at 10. Jessica was skeptical, but couldn't deny the resemblance was uncanny. "Mom, we buried Matt. We grieved him. This can't be real," she said. But what if Matthew had somehow survived? What if, through some extraordinary circumstance, he had built a new life, unaware of the family still mourning him? Or worse, what if he had chosen to disappear? The Brennans hired private investigator Daniel Kovacs, who specialized in missing persons cases. "In 30 years of doing this job, I've never had a case like this," Kovacs admitted. His first step was to analyze the Instagram photo using facial recognition software. The results came back with an 87% match to Matthew's military ID photo. Not conclusive, but significant enough to pursue. But how does a declared dead American soldier end up in Argentina without setting off any alerts? What documentation would he be using? And why would he never contact his family? Kovacs traced the Instagram account to travel blogger Emma Chen, who had over 200,000 followers and was known for her South American travel content. Through careful messaging that revealed nothing of the situation, he arranged a call with Emma. "The man in the background of your Buenos Aires cafe photo from 3 weeks ago, do you know him?" Kovacs asked casually. Emma didn't, but remembered him because he'd been a regular at that cafe. "He's always there in the mornings reading a newspaper. I think the staff called him Miguel, not Matthew." Miguel. Was this a new identity? A coincidence? Or was Sarah Brennan simply seeing her son's face in a stranger because she so desperately wanted him to be alive? The first major turn in the investigation came when Kovacs, working with local contacts in Buenos Aires, managed to obtain security footage from the cafe. The grainy video showed Miguel arriving, greeting the staff with familiar ease and sitting at his regular table. His gait, the way he ran his hand through his hair. Sarah watched the footage a dozen times. "That's how Matthew moves," she insisted. "That's his father's walk." The facial similarity was striking, but without DNA, there was no way to be certain. Yet something else caught Kovacs' attention: the man's left hand. When he reached for his coffee cup, there was a distinctive stiffness to his fingers, consistent with reconstructive surgery. Matthew had broken those same fingers during basic training. As the investigation deepened, Kovacs uncovered that Miguel Garcia had appeared in Buenos Aires approximately 12 years ago. He had established a small but successful computer repair business, lived alone in an apartment in Palermo, and kept a relatively low profile. Neighbors described him as friendly but private, with an accent they couldn't quite place. "He speaks excellent Spanish, but sometimes uses phrases that aren't quite right," one neighbor reported. "We assumed he was European." The timeline aligned perfectly. Appearing in Argentina 2 years after Matthew's reported death would have given him time to recover from injuries and establish a new identity. The question that kept Sarah awake at night. If this was Matthew, why had he never reached out? The possibility that her son had chosen to abandon his identity, his family, and his country was almost harder to bear than his death had been. "I don't care what happened or why he left," Sarah told Kovac. "I just need to know if he's alive." Jessica was more cautious. "Mom, we need to prepare for the possibility that this isn't Matt, or that if it is, he might not want to be found." The family was divided. Sarah's ex-husband and Matthew's father, Richard, refused to get involved, believing this was just Sarah's inability to accept their son's death. "You're reopening wounds that took years to heal," he told her. Kovac advised against direct contact until they had more information. "If this is your son and he's living under a new identity, there could be complicated reasons for that. Approaching him without understanding the situation could be dangerous for everyone involved." Instead, Kovac continued building a profile of Miguel Garcia. The business license for his repair shop listed a birth date different from Matthew's and a birthplace in Spain. Immigration records showed entry to Argentina on a Spanish passport. Either this was an elaborate identity constructed over many years, or Miguel Garcia truly was a Spanish expatriate who happened to bear an extraordinary resemblance to Matthew Brennan. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Kovac discovered that Miguel's computer repair shop specialized in cybersecurity. Matthew had been trained in communications during his service. More compelling still, Miguel's business logo, a stylized phoenix rising from circuit boards, used the same shade of blue as Matthew's childhood bedroom. Coincidence? Perhaps. But as the parallels accumulated, they became harder to dismiss. Through careful observation, Kovac learned that Miguel had a morning routine: coffee at the cafe, then a short walk to his shop. This provided a narrow window for a seemingly chance encounter. Sarah flew to Buenos Aires against everyone's advice. "I've spent 14 years wondering if we could have had a proper goodbye," she told Jessica before leaving. "I won't spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have had a proper hello." Kovac arranged for Sarah to be at the cafe before Miguel's usual arrival time. The plan was simple. She would sit at a nearby table and let fate decide what happened next. No confrontation, no emotional scene, just two strangers in the same space, with one recognizing the other. The morning was clear and cool when Sarah took her seat, hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup to stop their trembling. Kovac sat at the opposite end, pretending to read a newspaper. At 8:17 a.m., Miguel entered the cafe. In person, the resemblance was even more striking. The same height, the same posture, older but undeniably similar to the son she had lost. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Miguel took his usual table, nodded to the barista who immediately prepared his regular order, and then, feeling eyes on him, he glanced in Sarah's direction. Their eyes met for 3 eternal seconds. Sarah saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by something else. Fear? The coffee cup in his hand trembled slightly, but his expression quickly returned to neutral. He looked away, paid for his coffee, and left without taking a sip. He didn't look back, but his pace was quicker than usual. Sarah sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. "That's him," she whispered to Kovac. "That's my son." What happened next changed everything. Rather than returning to his shop, Miguel went straight to his apartment, emerged 20 minutes later with a small bag, and headed to the airport. Kovac, following at a distance, watched him purchase a ticket to Montevideo, Uruguay. He was running, but the reaction confirmed what Sarah already knew. This man recognized her. A stranger wouldn't flee from an older woman's gaze. Only someone with something to hide would react that way. Only someone who knew Sarah Brennan would understand the significance of her presence in that cafe. The next phase of the investigation focused on understanding why a presumably dead Marine would abandon his identity and country. Kovac worked with contacts in military intelligence, carefully probing without revealing too much. What they discovered cast the entire situation in a new light. Matthew's unit had been involved in an unclassified operation just before the IED attack. 3 members of the unit had died, 2 were injured, and 1, according to newly unearthed documents, had been initially reported missing before being declared killed in action. That one was Corporal Matthew Brennan. 48 hours after the cafe encounter, Sarah received an anonymous email. "Some ghosts should stay buried. I'm sorry for your pain, but the son you knew died in Afghanistan. Please go home and remember him as he was." The email came from a temporary account that was deleted minutes after sending. Cyber analysis suggested it had been routed through multiple VPNs, the work of someone with significant technical expertise. The message was both a confirmation and a warning. Sarah returned to California with more questions than answers. Was Matthew in witness protection? Had he been involved in something that required him to disappear? Or had he simply found an opportunity in the chaos of war to escape a life he no longer wanted? The family was fractured over how to proceed. Jessica wanted to respect what seemed to be Matthew's wishes to remain dead. Richard maintained that they were chasing a ghost that resembled their son. But Sarah couldn't abandon the search now that she knew the truth. The investigation uncovered more pieces of the puzzle. 2 members of Matthew's unit, who had survived the attack, had died under questionable circumstances in the years following their return to civilian life. One from an apparent suicide that his family disputed, another in a single vehicle accident on an empty road. Kovacs found another connection. Before deployment, Matthew had reported concerns about certain activities he had witnessed within his unit. The report had been filed but apparently never investigated. Was Matthew hiding from something more dangerous than painful memories? 6 months after the Buenos Aires encounter, a package arrived at Sarah's home. Inside was a battered dog tag, Matthew's, and a handwritten note. "Some choices are made for survival, not preference. I never wanted to cause more pain." No return address, no signature, but postmarked from Paraguay. Forensic analysis confirmed the handwriting matched samples of Matthew's from before his deployment. Sarah had the answer she had sought, but it opened a door to more complex questions. Her son was alive, but he could not, or would not, come home. Military officials, when confronted with the evidence by the Brennan family's attorney, initially denied any irregularities in the handling of Matthew's case. But as pressure mounted and the possibility of media attention loomed, a different narrative emerged. They acknowledged there had been administrative errors in the identification process following the IED attack. They suggested that Matthew, severely injured and possibly suffering from traumatic brain injury, might have been separated from his identification during medical evacuation. Perhaps he had experienced amnesia, they suggested, or had been psychologically unable to return to his former life. These explanations, while plausible on the surface, failed to address the systematic way in which Miguel Garcia had established his new identity, or why military records had been so definitively closed on Corporal Brennan. A year after discovering her son was alive, Sarah made peace with a painful reality. Knowing Matthew was alive somewhere in the world would have to be enough. The son she had raised and loved was gone, replaced by a man who had chosen or been forced to become someone else. She kept the dog tag close and told no one about the occasional anonymous postcards that arrived from different South American countries, never with words, just a small drawn star, Matthew's childhood signature on family cards, to let her know he was still alive. The case of Matthew Brennan exists in a liminal space between resolution and mystery. A soldier declared dead, glimpsed by chance on social media, confirmed alive but permanently beyond reach. For Sarah, the grief of losing her son transformed into a different kind of loss, mourning a living person who cannot return. For whatever reasons, fear, duty, trauma, or choice, Matthew Brennan remains officially deceased, while Miguel Garcia continues his quiet existence, moving periodically from country to country, a ghost who left just enough evidence to be recognized by the one person who would never stop looking for him: his mother. Military records still list Corporal Matthew Brennan as killed in action on June 17, 2009. His name remains engraved on a memorial wall honoring fallen Marines. His medals sit in a display case in Sarah's living room. And somewhere in South America, a man who was once Matthew Brennan builds computer systems with hands that bear the scars of a war he officially didn't survive. Two truths exist simultaneously: the official record and the reality known only to a few. Sometimes when asked about her son, Sarah simply says, "He's at peace now." It's not entirely a lie. The discovery that changed Sarah's life came through the most mundane of modern activities, scrolling through social media. It raises unsettling questions about the permanence of reinvention in a world where cameras are everywhere, and algorithms can connect the most disparate dots. For those who seek to disappear, whether by choice or necessity, The digital age creates new vulnerabilities. A chance photo taken by a stranger, shared with the world, can unravel years of careful anonymity in an instant. For the Brennan family, the truth brought both healing and fresh pain. Jessica eventually came to accept her mother's decision to keep Matthew's secret. "I understand why she needs this," she told her husband, "and maybe in some way, it's better to know he's out there somewhere, living a life, even if it can't include us." Richard maintained his distance from what he called Sarah's fantasy, unable or unwilling to reconsider 14 years of grief. The family, fractured by war, remained divided by its aftermath. The final piece of the puzzle arrived 3 years after Sarah's discovery. A journalist investigating corruption within military contracting companies during the Afghanistan war published a series of exposés. Among the allegations, a classified operation gone wrong, a cover-up reaching high into military command, and the deliberate falsification of death reports for a Marine who had witnessed criminal activity. No names were published, but the details aligned perfectly with Matthew's case. The journalist was found dead in his hotel room 2 days after publication. The official cause? Heart attack. He was 36 years old. Sarah Brennan keeps her phone close now, never knowing when an unknown number might call with nothing but silence on the other end, a silence she has learned to interpret as her son checking that she's okay. The postcards stopped after the journalist's death. The last one, from Chile, contained the only message since the dog tag, "I'm sorry for everything. Know that I loved you all." Some truths cost too much. Sarah understood then that pursuing the full truth might endanger not just her son's new life, but her own safety as well. In her garden, Sarah planted a tree the year Matthew was declared dead. It stands tall now, its branches spreading wide. Sometimes she sits beneath it and speaks to her son, telling him about her day as if he might hear her words carried on the wind to wherever he is. She tells no one about the anonymous donations to her medical expenses when she battled cancer, or the sophisticated cyber-security system that mysteriously appeared on her computer after she received threatening emails following her trip to Buenos Aires. Small signs that her son, in his way, is still watching over his family. The story of Matthew Brennan exists in the shadows between official records and lived reality. It's a story about the lengths to which institutions will go to protect themselves, the impossible choices faced by those who witness wrongdoing, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and child that transcends death, even a death that never actually occurred. For Sarah, the truth is both a comfort and a burden. Her son lives, but in a world separate from hers, connected by invisible threads of memory and blood. As years pass, Sarah has made her peace with uncertainty. She keeps a private album of Miguel Garcia, compiled from social media glimpses, where he appears in the backgrounds of strangers' photos, a digital ghost accidentally captured in moments of ordinary life. A coffee shop in Colombia, a street market in Peru, a ferry in Uruguay. Brief windows into a life paralleling hers, moving through time and space on a trajectory she can observe but never join. It is a strange comfort, this long-distance witnessing. Not the relationship she had imagined with her adult son, but the only one possible under the circumstances. The military never officially reopened Matthew's case, maintaining that the evidence was inconclusive. The Brennan family attorney advised that pursuing legal action would likely result in more harm than resolution. "Whatever your son is involved in," he told Sarah, "forcing it into the light could have consequences none of us can predict." Sarah made the decision to protect her son's secret, understanding that his continued survival might depend on maintaining the fiction of his death. On the anniversary of Matthew's death, Sarah no longer visits the empty grave with his name. Instead, she donates to organizations supporting veterans with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, honoring the son she lost while acknowledging the man who still exists somewhere in the world. It's her way of remaining connected to both versions of her child, the Marine who never returned and the man who couldn't come home. For those who hear rumors of the case, and there have been whispers in military circles and among families of other soldiers lost in similar circumstances, the story of Matthew Brennan represents different things. For some, it's a conspiracy theory, a grieving mother's delusion elevated to urban legend. For others who have reason to distrust official narratives, it's confirmation of their worst suspicions about institutional corruption. For the few who know the truth, it's a cautionary tale about the cost of witnessing and the price of survival. Sarah keeps a go-bag packed now, a habit she developed after noticing occasional surveillance outside her home in the months following her return from Argentina. She changes her phone regularly and has learned to spot signs of digital intrusion. These precautions may be excessive, born from maternal paranoia and too many late nights researching conspiracy theories, or they may be entirely reasonable for someone who has glimpsed the machinery behind official truths. Either way, she has accepted this new normal, this life where her son is both dead and alive, where grief has been replaced by a vigilant guardianship of a secret that could destroy them both. The last confirmed sighting of Miguel Garcia was 2 years ago in a remote Chilean coastal town, where he had apparently established a small internet security consulting business. According to local sources, he left suddenly after a group of American tourists visited the area. His current whereabouts remain unknown. Sarah doesn't search anymore. She understands now that finding him again could endanger him. Instead, she waits, knowing that if it's safe, if it's ever possible, he will find a way to reach her. In the end, the story of Matthew Brennan is not just about a soldier who didn't die or a mother who refused to stop believing. It's about the malleability of truth in a world where official narratives can be manufactured as easily as identities. It's about the power of institutions to create reality through documentation, and the fragility of that reality when confronted with the simple, unstoppable force of a mother's recognition. Sarah Brennan saw her son's face in a crowd of digital strangers and unraveled a truth that many had worked to conceal. In doing so, she gained and lost him all over again. What would you do if someone you loved and mourned suddenly appeared, alive but unwilling or unable to return to you? Could you respect their need to remain officially dead while knowing they live and breathe in the world? Is the comfort of knowing they survive worth the pain of understanding they cannot be part of your life? These are the questions Sarah Brennan lives with every day, questions with no simple answers, only complicated choices about love and distance and protection. And somewhere in the world, a man who was once Matthew Brennan lives with his own impossible questions. Does he regret the moment of recognition in that Buenos Aires cafe? Does he wonder what might have happened if he had embraced his mother instead of running? Or does he understand, as Sarah has come to understand, that some distances cannot be bridged, that some truths demand separation as the price of survival? Perhaps in quiet moments, he takes out a worn photograph of his family and remembers the life he left behind, not by choice but by necessity. A life that officially ended in Afghanistan but somehow continues in the margins of the world, in the spaces between official records and lived reality. The truth about Matthew Brennan remains elusive, existing in the gap between what we are told and what we discover for ourselves. It reminds us that in an age of unprecedented documentation and surveillance, disappearance requires extraordinary effort, and recognition can come from the most unexpected sources. A mother's eyes scanning a social media feed, an algorithm making connections no human would likely notice, a moment of unguarded recognition in a cafe thousands of miles from home. These are the threads from which truth is woven, even when official records insist on a different story. Do you believe some secrets should remain buried, even from those who love us most? Or is the truth, however painful, always worth uncovering? The case of Matthew Brennan offers no easy answers, only the complicated reality of a family forever changed by war, deception, and a chance discovery on Instagram that rewrote the ending of a story everyone thought was finished. Perhaps in the end, it's enough to know that some bonds transcend even death, whether real or manufactured, and that recognition, that profound moment of seeing and being seen, remains one of the most powerful forces in human experience. As this story spread through whispered conversations among military families and online forums dedicated to missing persons cases, it began to take on a life of its own. Some dismissed it as an urban legend, a grieving mother's fantasy that grew into something larger. Others, particularly families of service members lost in similar circumstances, saw it as validation of their own suspicions and unanswered questions. Several reached out to Sarah, sharing stories of inconsistencies in official reports, of personal effects that showed signs of use after declared death dates, of sightings never investigated. Each story was different in its details but united by a common thread: institutional narratives that crumbled under close examination. Veterans who had served in Matthew's unit began to experience unusual scrutiny. 2 reported break-ins where nothing valuable was taken but computers were accessed. 1 found a tracking device under his car after he reached out to Sarah seeking more information about her discovery. These incidents could be coincidental, paranoid interpretations of random events, or evidence that Matthew's case touched nerves in places with the resources to monitor and intimidate those who asked too many questions. 3 years after Sarah's discovery in Buenos Aires, a military whistleblower released documents suggesting that Matthew's unit had been involved in monitoring financial transactions between defense contractors and local officials in Afghanistan. The whistleblower, a former intelligence analyst who had processed reports from the field, claimed that Matthew's unit had uncovered evidence of significant fund misappropriation, millions of dollars meant for reconstruction projects being diverted to private accounts. Shortly after filing their report, the unit encountered the IED that officially killed Matthew and several others. The whistleblower was careful not to make direct accusations of deliberate targeting, but the implication was clear. The timing was, at minimum, suspicious. The documents, while compelling, couldn't be authenticated. The whistleblower used encrypted channels and remained anonymous, citing the suspicious deaths of others who had attempted to expose similar issues. Major news organizations declined to run the story without further corroboration, leaving it to circulate in alternative media spaces where it gained traction among those already distrustful of official military narratives. Sarah received the information with caution, understanding that in the vacuum of concrete facts, speculation could take on the appearance of truth. Still, it aligned with the pattern she had observed. Matthew had reported concerns had potentially witnessed something significant and had then vanished into a new identity rather than returning home. Jessica, initially skeptical of her mother's certainty, became more involved in the investigation after her own young son, Matthew's nephew, whom he had never met, was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that typically runs in families. Medical records showed no history of the condition in either Jessica's or her husband's family. When she contacted the military to request more detailed medical information about Matthew, hoping to understand if he might have been a carrier, she encountered a level of resistance that seemed disproportionate to a routine records request. "They acted like I was asking for classified information, not my brother's medical history," she told Sarah. "It made me wonder what else they're hiding in his file." This medical mystery added another dimension to the investigation. If Matthew had indeed survived and established a new identity, who was buried in the casket that had been returned to the family? The Brennans had been told there were limited remains due to the nature of the explosion, but the military had claimed sufficient DNA evidence to make a positive identification. Had the entire identification process been fabricated, and if so, how many others had been subject to similar manipulation of the truth? Richard Brennan, Matthew's father, who had maintained emotional distance from Sarah's investigation, experienced his own moment of doubt during a veterans event, where he encountered a former commander in Matthew's chain of command. The officer, unaware of Richard's identity, became visibly uncomfortable when Matthew's name arose in conversation about fallen service members from that deployment. "He didn't look like a man remembering a dead soldier," Richard later told Sarah. "He looked like a man who'd seen a ghost and was afraid someone else had seen it too." It was the first time Richard had allowed himself to consider that Sarah's seemingly impossible discovery might have merit. As the circle of those aware of the case expanded, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in her daily life. Her mail occasionally arrived opened and resealed. Her internet connection experienced unexplained outages. Twice she observed the same nondescript sedan parked across from her house on days when she had discussed the case on her home phone. Paranoia, perhaps, or prudent observation of actual surveillance. Either way, she began to take precautions, using burner phones, meeting contacts in public places, varying her routine. The mother who had once lived an ordinary suburban life now employed counter-surveillance techniques she had learned from books and online research, becoming as much a ghost in her own way as her son had become. The psychological toll of living with such uncertainty manifested in different ways for each family member. Jessica had nightmares where she encountered her brother, but couldn't speak to him. Richard threw himself into veterans advocacy work, perhaps seeking redemption for his initial dismissal of Sarah's claims. And Sarah developed an almost preternatural awareness of cameras and observation, always conscious of who might be watching, who might inadvertently capture an image that could endanger her son's carefully constructed anonymity. She removed herself from social media, asked friends not to tag her in photos, became selective about which gatherings she would attend. Her life contracted around the secret she carried. Kovač continued to track Miguel Garcia through his network of contacts, observing from a distance as the man who might be Matthew Brennan moved between South American countries, never staying in one place longer than 18 months, always working in fields adjacent to cybersecurity and communications. His businesses were small but successful, his client list private, his digital footprint minimal. He dated occasionally, but never seemed to form long-term attachments. No marriage records, no children, no permanent roots anywhere. It was the life of someone who knew they might need to disappear again at any moment, a life built on sand, not concrete. 6 years after the initial discovery, Kovač identified a pattern in Miguel's movements. Despite his seemingly random relocations across South America, he always positioned himself within a day's travel of a U.S. embassy or consulate. Was this coincidence, practical thinking, or evidence of an ongoing connection to American institutions? More intriguingly, his relocations often preceded or followed significant personnel changes at those diplomatic outposts. When a new military attaché was appointed, Miguel would appear in that country. When security staff rotated out, he would move on. It suggested coordination, planning, perhaps even official sanction of his movements. This pattern raised new possibilities. Perhaps Matthew hadn't fled in fear or guilt. Perhaps his death and reinvention had been orchestrated with official approval, a managed extraction when his position became untenable. If so, Sarah's discovery and pursuit might have compromised not just her son's personal safety, but potentially a sanctioned operation. It would explain the apparent surveillance of her activities and the resistance to her inquiries. It would also suggest that at least some elements within military or intelligence structures knew exactly where Matthew was and what he was doing. The possibility that Matthew might be operating with official sanction created a new ethical dilemma for Sarah. If her son was involved in something considered necessary for national security, did she have the right to potentially compromise that work by seeking direct contact? Was her maternal desire to reconnect with her child in conflict with larger concerns? These questions haunted her as she tried to balance her personal needs against the possibility that Matthew's distance was serving some greater purpose, one that might be jeopardized by a mother's entirely natural pursuit of truth and connection. 7 years after the cafe encounter in Buenos Aires, Sarah received a plain envelope with no return address, postmarked from Miami. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message: December 14th, Playa Hermosa, Costa Rica, sunrise. No signature, no explanation. The date was 3 weeks away. After consulting with Kovač, Sarah made arrangements, telling friends and family she was taking a short vacation, a common enough activity for a retired woman to avoid raising suspicion. She traveled through indirect routes, changed hotels twice after arriving in Costa Rica, used only cash, and arrived at the designated beach an hour before dawn, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The beach was nearly empty in the pre-dawn darkness. A few joggers, a couple walking a dog, normal early morning beach activities. Sarah sat on a piece of driftwood, watching the horizon lighten gradually. As the first rays of sun broke over the water, she sensed rather than saw someone sit beside her, leaving a careful foot of space between them. Neither looked directly at the other. "You shouldn't have come to Buenos Aires," a voice said quietly. Matthew's voice, deeper, accented now, but unmistakably his. "But I'm glad you did." For 20 minutes they sat side by side, eyes focused on the brightening horizon, having a conversation unlike any other. Matthew confirmed parts of what Sarah had pieced together: the financial irregularities his unit had discovered, the convenient timing of the IED attack, his separation from his team during the chaos, and the opportunity that separation had created. "Someone high up made a decision," he explained. "It was easier to list me as KIA than explain why certain contractors suddenly lost their personnel after our report. Easier to give me a new identity than protect me with my old one." He didn't specify who had made that decision or facilitated his transformation into Miguel Garcia, whether it had been an official operation or the work of individuals within the system acting on their own initiative. "Why didn't you tell us?" All these years, Matt. We mourned you. We buried an empty coffin. Sarah's voice broke on the words, years of grief and recent confusion collapsing into this moment of reunion. I couldn't, he replied simply. At first because I was told it would put you at risk, later because I discovered that was true. He described surveillance on the family in the months after his death, unexplained inquiries about his personal effects, subtle investigations of his closest contacts. They were looking for something they thought I might have sent home. Notes, records, evidence. He hadn't sent anything, having never anticipated the danger until it was too late. But those looking for such evidence wouldn't necessarily believe that. As long as I was dead, you were safe. As long as I stayed Miguel, you could live normal lives. That calculus had changed when Sarah recognized him in Buenos Aires. Once you knew, once you started asking questions, the old threat became active again. I had to make contact, establish boundaries, let you know enough to be careful without telling you enough to make you a target. The postcard, the dog tags, breadcrumbs to assure her he was alive without creating a trail that could be followed. This meeting was a risk, carefully planned over months, with multiple contingencies and escape routes. After today, we go back to the way it was, he told her. I watch from a distance. You live your life. It's the only way this works. Before Sarah could protest, could argue for some middle path where they could maintain contact, Matthew handed her a small object, a simple thumb drive. Everything I know is on here. Names, dates, transaction records. It's encrypted. If anything happens to me, if I miss sending a signal for more than 6 months, take this to the journalist whose name is on the inside of the case. Only then, promise me. Sarah promised, though the weight of what he was asking settled heavily on her. He was giving her both the truth she had sought and a responsibility she had never asked to bear. As the beach began to fill with more morning visitors, Matthew stood. I have to go. Different planes, different countries. By tonight I'll be someone else. Somewhere else. He paused, finally looking directly at his mother for the first time in nearly a decade. I miss you, all of you, but this is how it has to be. He walked away without embracing her, without any physical contact that might be observed and noted by unknown watchers. Sarah remained on the driftwood, the thumb drive concealed in her closed fist, watching her son disappear for the second time in her life. That brief meeting on a Costa Rican beach would be their only face-to-face contact. Matthew returned to his life as Miguel, or whatever identity followed Miguel. Sarah returned to California with renewed certainty about her son's survival and a more complete understanding of why he remained absent from her life. She told Jessica and Richard only selected details, honoring Matthew's wish to limit the circle of those who knew the full truth. The thumb drive she secured in a location known only to her, a digital insurance policy that she hoped would never need to be activated. In the years that followed, the pattern of their strange, distant relationship continued. Anonymous postcards, occasional untraceable emails sent through encrypted channels. Once, during Sarah's second bout with cancer, a specialist appeared at her hospital, claiming to have been sent for a consultation by her insurance, a specialist whose treatment approach made a critical difference in her recovery. Sarah recognized the intervention for what it was, her son using his resources and connections to protect her from a distance, just as she protected his secret. The wider implications of Matthew's case, the corruption he had uncovered, the system that had both saved and exiled him, remained unaddressed in any public forum. The whistleblower's documents faded from alternative media without gaining mainstream traction. The suspicious deaths connected to Matthew's unit were officially classified as accidents or suicides, the cases closed without the deeper investigations they perhaps warranted. On paper, the narrative remained as it had been constructed. Corporal Matthew Brennan died honorably in service to his country, one of many casualties in a complex and protracted conflict. But beneath the official record, a different truth persisted. A mother who had buried an empty coffin had found her son alive in the background of a stranger's vacation photo. A soldier declared dead continued to exist in the margins of the world under names and identities that changed like seasons, and between them stretched a bond that neither death certificates nor national security imperatives had managed to sever completely, transformed and constrained, but unbreakable in its essence. 10 years after her discovery on Instagram, Sarah Brennan's perspective on truth had fundamentally changed. What once seemed absolute, life and death, presence and absence, now existed on a spectrum of possibility. Official documents, she had learned, were as malleable as the identities they purported to fix in place. Institutional narratives served institutional needs, often at the expense of individual realities. And in a world of ubiquitous digital observation, true privacy had become both precious and nearly impossible, with anonymity requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. Sarah had made her peace with contradiction. Her son was both dead and alive. She had both found him and lost him. The truth had both healed her and created new wounds. She had become a keeper of secrets she had never sought to know, a guardian of a reality that existed in the space between official records and lived experience. It was not the relationship she had imagined having with her adult child, but it was the one circumstance had made possible. Loving from an unbridgeable distance, protecting by maintaining separation, connecting through the most ephemeral of signals. For those who hear fragments of this story, and there are whispers in certain circles, questions that remain unanswered despite official insistence that no questions exist, the case of Matthew Brennan represents different things. For families of the missing or the questionably deceased, it offers a tantalizing possibility. That absence doesn't always mean what we're told it means, that official certainty might mask deeper complications. For those with reason to distrust institutional narratives, it confirms suspicions that records can be altered, identities manufactured, and truths obscured when they prove inconvenient to power. But for Sarah Brennan, it is simply the story of her family, fragmented by forces beyond their control, yet still bound by connections that transcend physical presence. She has learned to recognize her son in absence, to read meaning in silences, to trust that despite everything that has happened, the essential bond between them remains intact across the distance. It is not the relationship she would have chosen, but it is the one they have, real, enduring, and existing beyond the boundaries of what official records claim is possible. In the end, the story of Matthew Brennan is not just about a soldier who didn't die, or a mother who refused to stop believing. It's about the space between documented reality and lived experience, about the human connections that persist, even when all official systems insist they have been severed. It's about the power of recognition, that profound moment when one human being truly sees another, across time and space and circumstance, through all the layers of identity and reinvention. In a single Instagram photo, in a fleeting glimpse of a familiar face in an unfamiliar setting, Sarah Brennan recognized her son, and in that recognition, she reclaimed a truth that transcended all official insistence on its impossibility. If your loved one vanished tomorrow, declared dead by official records, despite your deepest intuition that they live on somewhere in the world, how far would you go to discover the truth? And if you found them changed, distant, living under a name not their own, could you accept the limitations that discovery might impose? Could you love from a distance, protect through absence, find meaning in the simple fact of their continued existence, even if you could never reclaim the relationship you once had? These are the questions at the heart of Matthew Brennan's story. Questions with no simple answers, only the complicated, messy, profound reality of human connection persisting against all odds and all official denial.